Thank you. Yeah, so come for the jazz, right? That's what this is. So I speak to a lot of students. I teach game development, and I speak to a lot of students and people who want to become students of game development. And also I speak to a lot of their moms, weirdly. Because these students, they always have moms, and these moms, they want arguments for why their kids should work in games. And I can really relate to that because it's a very weird profession. I'll get into it a little bit more in a bit, but if I do anything at all with this talk, I hope I can give you some arguments. If you're someone who wants to get into game development, why you should do that. And if you're someone who's making decisions about whether or not we should do a lot of game development education, I hope I can give you some arguments for why that's a good idea as well. But let's address the biggest question first. Who's this guy? This guy is me. I'm Mikkel Lodahl. I was provoked into finding some interesting fonts for this, so that's why this up here is different, and this down here is actually a font that approximates my own handwriting. It's called Kindergarten, so take from that what you will. I'm a senior lecturer that translates to an associate professor, I think, and I direct an institute called the Institute for Danish Game Development at Dania Academy's Games Department, Dania Games. Dania Academy down here, this is a school that is in the field of higher education, but it's below the bachelor's degree level. We give out professionally oriented applied science degrees, and we have 23 different educations, and I'm on 2 of them, and those are the game-related stuff that's in Dania Games. We also run a network of incubation stuff that's called Game Hub Denmark, where we have around 20 small game-related businesses in Grenaa, Denmark. And if you don't know where Grenaa is in Denmark, you're not alone. A lot of people don't know that. If you imagine Denmark looks kind of like a face that protrudes from Germany. Then there's a nose, and right where the snot comes out, that's where Grenaa is located. So that's it. So that's the first question, who's this guy? The second question is, why on earth would you teach game development? Well, traditionally, game development is self-taught. If you look around the world and if you look at the history of game development, it's mostly been done by people who thought that they could do it to look cool, which tells you that they were programmers, right? Because writing very difficult code, which is what you do when you do games, is something that you show off with when you're a programmer. One of the first computer games ever made was made by a very famous programmer called Alan Turing. It was a chess game, and there was no computer that could actually run it, so he wrote all the code and then ran it by taking inputs from a guy who was sitting in front of him and then acting as how the program would act on a chessboard, and the program lost. But it was very impressive nonetheless, and that's the thing. It's traditionally a self-taught thing. The problem is also in games that there's not necessarily enough jobs. They're speaking at the moment about maybe we are at the top level of an investment cycle, and if you follow game industry news, you know that a lot of people have just been laid off in the American game industry. Actually, just about the amount of people who work in the Danish game industry have just been laid off in the American games industry, which is sort of sad. And finally, it requires enormous commitment. Why would you teach people to go into this business? Well, because of those things. That's why you teach people to go in there, because if you teach game development, you teach some skills that you need everywhere else. You teach people to teach themselves. You teach people the tenacity to go into a very high competition environment, and you teach people to be proud of what they're doing. Basically, you teach innovation and entrepreneurship when you teach game development. And that is, I think, my best argument, especially if the people you're trying to convince are not convinced by the argument because it's fun. Because that's the real reason we make games, usually. The challenge that we face in Denmark, which I have come to recognize people face all around the world when it comes to higher education, is the following. up until you get to higher education, Danish pupils are assessed directly by their teacher. So you do something and the teacher tells you whether it's good or bad, what you're doing. This is especially true in their daily practice. Usually the teachers are very subjective, but very authoritative. So I, as a teacher, have taken a long education, so therefore I can tell you what you're saying is right or whether it's wrong, right? This is an argument to authority, or you can do some sort of standardized tests if you're in mathematics, but usually in our daily lives, we just do something in education and a teacher tells us whether it's a good idea or not, whether we did well or not. This process, more than anything specific, with the way you try to teach innovation, where you try to teach entrepreneurship, is teaching pupils or students how to think. It's teaching pupils that the most valuable things that you can do is have a good relationship with your teacher, and that you can guess what the teacher is thinking. This is something I can see in the faces of many of my students when they first arrive at the school, that they're always thinking, oh, what's he thinking? How can I say what he wants me to say? And I don't want anyone to say what I want them to say. I want them to say what they want to say. And that's the point, right? We need to take people who have been trained for 10 to 13 years into guessing what I want them to say and empower them to allow them to say what they want to say. Because it's not enough for an innovative mindset that you can just guess what other people are thinking. It's something that's valuable to a degree, but it's not something that is enough. And you can actually see this in the way entrepreneurship works in Denmark, because Danish entrepreneurs and innovators usually produce some companies that are based on relationships. This is what they have been trained for. They have been trained for building up good relationships with their teachers and guessing what they're thinking. So they do companies that perfect some services that already exist, that facilitate the use of products or services, that they do a lot of consulting, and they do a lot of sales, and they do a lot of user-driven design. This is what we usually mean when we hear politicians say, oh, we're going to live off the brains of our people. This is what they usually mean. We're not going to produce something new, we're going to perfect stuff that's already there. This is obviously not true of everything. There are Danish companies that produce something that's truly new. Lego, for example, they usually produce a lot of new stuff during their fiscal years, but these don't work as Danish companies, they work as multinationals, and they're usually also pretty old. Why? Well, that's because if you want to be a very successful entrepreneur or innovator, and this is the part of the entrepreneurship innovationship slideshow where you have a picture of Steve Jobs, because we are contractually obliged when we talk about entrepreneurship and innovation to have a picture of Steve Jobs somewhere. If you want to be very successful about this, then you have to act instead of react. You have to be able to not only do what people need and what people ask for, but act and do something that they didn't expect, but that they then will discover that they need. And if anyone ever made us realize that we needed something that we couldn't have thought of before, then I guess it's Steve Jobs, right? You have to build something. You can't just fill it out. Usually when you get assignments in a lot of educational contexts, you have to fill something out. You have to write an essay that's about this or about that. But you have to actually build something that's new if you're successful, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur or innovator. Then you have to discuss rather than accept or dismiss. Usually we are trained, and this goes on not just in educations, but in our entire society, to very quickly judge people and say, oh, I agree with him, I disagree with her, I agree with her, I disagree with him. But if you want to be actually successful here, you must be able to discuss, you must be able to access different kinds of viewpoints at different kinds of times, because the longer you can keep up discussion, the more you figure out about what you want to do and how you want to say it. Finally, you have to trust. You can't undermine or submit, because if you're a very successful entrepreneur and innovator, then you work with other people. So you should trust other people instead of working against them, which is something that we're trained to do quite a lot in competitive environments like education. But you also have to trust yourself, obviously, which is sadly eroded in a lot of students. So this is not that different from game development, and that's my point. That in game development, you also must act, you must not react. You can't make a good game defensively. You can make games defensively, obviously, and you can make games in a way that everyone else wants you to make games, but they're not going to be very good. They might be successful, but you're not going to feel satisfied. You have to build and not fill out. You can't really design by the numbers. You can paint by the numbers, but you can't design by the numbers, because once you start doing that, then you again are not making good games. You're not making something that actually satisfies you. You have to discuss, not accept or dismiss, because we're not working with a linear medium. We're working with an interactive medium. A game is an engine that keeps running, and you keep manipulating it and poking at it from a lot of different sides. It's not something that you open up and then you find an answer. It's not a book, it's not a movie, it's not something that's linear where someone is telling you something directly. This is somewhere where you are discussing. When you're playing a game, you keep discussing with the designer what this game is about, basically. So here we are again. We have to be able to keep that discussion open. Also because games are basically great design experiments, and design experiments have to keep discussion open for as long as possible. You have to trust, not undermine or submit, because you have to trust your own ideas, and you have to trust your collaborators, and you have to trust your audience, and these are things that draw you in different directions all the time. But you can't lose trust in any of them, and this is extremely difficult. But this is something that you can learn if you focus on this. And the way you can learn it is by practicing it. You can't learn this by listening to inspirational talks or reading books on how to lay out a budget. Basically, you're not going to say, okay, I just watched these 5 TED Talks, now I'm a great entrepreneur. This is not how the world works, and you cannot do the same thing either with game development. Both of these things are obviously useful. I mean, you can learn stuff from these things, but they're not enough, and you can have some of it already. You can already have what we call the entrepreneurial mindset or the game designer mindset, but you can also actually, if you're feeling challenged by it or if you want to get better at it, you can actually learn it by getting chances to do it. And the point here is that you have to do it and 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 do it. I spared you some of the repetitions of that. Until it becomes a habit. Again, this looks like a game. I think it's Rafe Costa who said that a game is a puzzle that you try to figure out how it works, and once you figure out how it works, then the game is over. And this is the same thing. You play a game until it's a habit, because then you mastered it, and that's the same thing. Right. So I made this model, the HAGI model, for how to describe what we do and how we can work with this. It's called HAGI because that's an acronym for handling, which is the Danish word for action, artifact, which is artifact, that's not so mysterious, gennemsigtighed, which is transparency, and inclusivitet, which is inclusivity. Sorry, that's obviously because there are these things. The idea is that you're supposed to act, to build things, and you need to know why you're building them and be open in the process, and you need to feel like you are a part of it and that you matter in making this project work, actually. So it makes sense because these are the principles we're working for. It's also, and this is a secret, this next part is secret. You can't tell people because someone might tell my boss. Because when I made this thing, I proposed that we should call it the Lodahl model, obviously because I'm called Lodahl, and he said, no way, that's too egotistical. So I came up with the idea, okay, let's call these, I had other names for these principles, let's call these this, because then it's called HAGI, which is what my now 5-year-old son was calling me at the time. So this is a secret, don't tell anyone, my boss doesn't know. I think everyone else knows. That's the fun part of it, right? So how do we do this? Well, we need to create a way for teachers to work with this. I want to go back one here because we need to create not only students who act, but teachers who can actually think of students as people who act, instead of people who do what I tell them to do. Teachers are very socialized into a certain way of thinking and a certain way of doing things. And we have to create teachers who can think of assignments as receiving products, instead of thinking, oh, the actual assignment is the report that you're writing up. No, the actual assignment has to be the game that you're handing in. You have to create some teachers who are willing to argue and listen, and not just dictate. And you have to create some teachers who will suggest things instead of sanctioning things, right? So you have to say, okay, you can do this in that direction, or do this in that direction, instead of saying, if you don't do exactly what I want, you're going down a grade. Right, so how did we do this? I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, because there's probably a very small percentage of you who care about this, but hit me up afterwards if you want to talk about it. In May and June in 2013, we tried to do some workshop with the teachers because we were discussing this. We wanted to take their mindset to something else, right? And they put in some input here, and then basically after the summer holiday, we started running all new courses as these HAGI things. So it was a complete changeover from one way of doing it to another. And in 2014, we had some very good evaluations. As you can see, 98% general approval rating among students. This is pretty rare. And a very high jump in grade point average. So we adopted the implementation completely, and now we only use this model for teaching. And that's, I think this is something that is difficult for other people to replicate, because most educational places move very slowly, but we are pretty small, so we can be more agile. How does it work then? What do we do with this? Well, we start out by the teacher introducing some necessary knowledge, as well as some pointers on how to find more. In my first course each semester, I teach interactive storytelling. So I introduce some models for interactive storytelling and how you use the Twine engine, and then the students build a game for 3 days and then present it afterwards, because the teacher introduces some necessary knowledge, and this is then used to build something for a problem, a solution for a problem in a group-based project, and that usually takes either 1 to 2 weeks for the knowledge, and then 1 to 3 weeks to make this solution. During this time, we advise students in 2 ways. We have process counselors, who are people from the games industry, who we hire in to come in and talk about, oh, how do we actually make games, and making sure that they get something out of it and they actually build something. And then we have technical counselors, which is a teacher who's not assessing, basically. It's a teacher who is who's coming in and helping out with technical difficulties. Finally, the product is then delivered, and then we have fast feedback from the teacher. This is generally given in writing, because this is an artifact that you can then look at later if you're a student, right? We break the feedback into 3 categories per project, so that we can usually identify this is a place where you need to work some more, this is a place where you're doing well, and we use the very soft sandwich model. We say something good, we say something bad, and then we give some constructive advice and maybe something good for each of the categories. Because of negativity bias, we need people to feel included, and if we, when we hear one negative thing, we have to hear 2 or 3 positive things for it to have been a positive experience. This is basic positive psychology. So, just to illustrate how big of a changeover this is, was for us, and which it will probably be for anyone who tries to do it, this is what we used to do, right? We used to have, from week 36 to week 50, we had all these courses that just went from one, that just went week by week, and you know this, you have the subjects, and then at the end of the semester, you have a first semester exam, where you actually do a practical project that can test the theory of all the previous courses of the semester. But now, we do this instead. Here's content design, that's what I just talked about. Practical project that tests this, and so on. This is not, but otherwise we have here practical project, practical project, practical project, theory project, and so on and so on. So you actually produce a lot of stuff here. This means that you keep jumping back and forth between learning stuff in the abstract and learning stuff practically. This helps quite a lot with retention, and it actually makes certain things go over quite much better. This development methods, that's basically something where you learn how to plan out a game before you do the game. That's just about as exciting as it sounds, and this is something that we can't. We have had a lot of trouble getting people to realize, because if we have this model, then they won't figure out that it's a stupid idea not to do it until they've failed this. But here they can fail already here. And that's good, because if you fail earlier in the process, then you can learn more. Plus, if you don't actually fail, if you make something that's good here, you're building a portfolio. And building a portfolio helps you quite a lot in the games business. If I have to give one piece of advice for people trying to go into the games business who might not have a game educational course that they can join, it would be build a portfolio. Why? Because these are the same things that you would want from an entrepreneur. You want in the games business to see someone who can execute, someone who can build something that actually works and that actually goes out there. That counts quite a lot more than any degree, by the way, which is not something I should say because I give out degrees, right? But still. All of this is based also on the idea of the quick feedback loop. So when you do something very quickly and then you get feedback right away, it gives you a lot of advantages. It trains you for a different kind of assessment. Instead of thinking of assessment as an examination that tells you, am I worth anything? It's an assessment that actually tells you, this is what you're doing well, this is where you could do something else. It trains you in failing forward, so that gives you some resilience, and it makes you value your failures as well as your successes. And you will have a lot of failures, everybody has. It prepares you for a business environment that's very agile, which game development is. Game development is usually, let's mess around until we have to start doing production, because we don't have that much more money left. That's usually how stuff goes, right? So it's a very agile thing. It mitigates some performance anxiety, because a lot of people, when they go all the way through a semester, and then at the end there's a stopgap. Oh, hey. And then at the end there's a stopgap, right, where they have to perform at the examination, or else the entire semester was a failure for them. If they can do the examinations and do the performance here and here and here and here and here, then it's spread out and it's easier to manage. So it helps with that sort of stuff as well. It's also quite good game design, because that's what we want from games. We want a quick feedback loop. We want to do something and then it has an effect. This makes the student able to navigate in and improve on their own situation, and they do this through these principles. They act, they do something. They actually do something instead of just sitting around listening, which I'm very sorry to inflict on you right now, but they actually do something. They actually build something that they can point to and be proud of. They discuss this, and they learn that they have to trust each other and they have to trust themselves. And crucially, that they have to trust their teachers, which is not something the educational system is very good at teaching them, that teachers are people who can be trusted, because teachers are the people who assess you, basically. The results, well, first off, around 30% of each of our student years found their own company, so that's an entrepreneurship result. That sounds like something that you could just say, hey, they found a company, that's great, and what if they all fail? But they don't. Around 50% of them actually are viable and live on for several years afterwards, which is quite a lot better than the normal Danish rate of success, which is 30%. So, our graduates When they're done, they create around 10 to 12 finished games. Obviously, some of those are crap, because they're supposed to be able to fail. But some of those are pretty good, and they can point to it. And when they do so many of them, they will build some sort of portfolio that they can then use in job hunting afterwards, if they're not of the people who found their own companies. When they then get a job, we learn very gratifyingly that they actually create a lot of value for companies that people who take the traditional university degrees that are related to games in Denmark do not, because they are more active. Basically, they can do entrepreneurship inside the company as well. And as I mentioned, grades significantly improved. Our completion rates also improved enormously. There's a saying in education that the best thing you can do is always do the newest thing, basically. That whenever you do something new, it's going to work very, very well, and this was true here as well. The first year that we had, they went from a 60% completion rate to a 95% completion rate. So almost all of them came through. This is good news for us, because in Denmark we are funded by the amount of people who go through, and we have stabilized at about 75%. So that's an increase in completion rates of 15%. That's pretty good when you look at how you can do this sort of thing. But can you use this anywhere or with anything else? Well, I've been discussing using this HAGI model in games education, and it basically works in any field where you think that you're producing artifacts, where you think you're producing something that's a product that can give value to other people, basically something that can live on its own. The reason it works very well with games is that the games industry works very similarly. You have to act a lot, you have to build a lot, and you have to discuss everything, and you have to trust each other. And game design actually works this way as well. This is what you do when you play a game. You're not sitting back and relaxed and just getting told something. No, you're acting inside this game. You're not only the receiver of content, you want to build stuff inside this game as well. Playing the game, as I mentioned, is an ongoing discussion with the designer about what this game is about and how to play it. How can I do this? How can I do that? If you look at something like Red Dead Redemption 2, which has just come out, when you play that, this is one long discussion with the designers about how it's like to be a cowboy, basically, and whether it should be only exciting or only boring, when the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right? Games are quite a lot like this. Now, the next slide is something that I have to do, both because it's very interesting, but also because these projects actually pay my salary at the moment. This is the BALTIC Game Industry Project, which we are a part of through the Game Hub Denmark, the incubation thing, and it is funded by the European Union. And I just wanted to mention what we do there, because we have been doing this for some years. We have a lot of experience in training students to be entrepreneurs, and in doing something to help them be that. So we collect and disseminate some practical knowledge of how incubation efforts in the video game space works, specifically when you do public-funded incubation. Because I'm from Denmark, everything is publicly funded in Denmark, basically. It's a weird country in that way. But we do collaborate with the private sector, right? So we do a public incubation space where we want people to be private enterprises. So the idea is, how do you translate entrepreneurship into games? What framework do you use for that? And what do you actually do when you set up some sort of incubational place? We have carried out some analysis, and in the beginning of next year, we will begin disseminating some action plans. This runs until September 2020, and we actually have partners in Lithuania, which makes it also nice to be here. Kaunas Science and Technology Park and the public institution Lithuanian Innovation Center are our two partners. So we're doing some stuff to try to teach this not only in education, but also to other places. But I think What's more interesting is what we basically can learn from this experiment that we've been running for the past 5 years with a lot of success. And this is how do you actually learn innovation and entrepreneurship? My learning is this: you don't do it by learning about innovation and entrepreneurship. You don't do it by having classes that are focused on innovation and that are focused on entrepreneurship. I think the best example of how that can go wrong is at Dania Academy, we once tried to do this, and we then did an innovation camp, which was a boot camp where a lot of students got out into a holiday place, and then they were there in these huts for a weekend, and they had to make new products and that sort of thing. And I walked around trying to give them some counseling. This was in the beginning of my teaching career. And the veteran teacher I was walking around with, who had been teaching them this innovation stuff, the only feedback that he gave them was, "Oh, you're not using enough Post-it notes." And that's the problem. When you do an innovation or entrepreneurship class, you get so focused on a process and some things that you do there to generate ideas. Oh, to generate ideas, you have to use these Post-it notes. So when something's wrong in your process, it's just that you're not doing enough of it. And this is a very inefficient way of going about it, and you don't actually learn innovation and entrepreneurship. You learn that not by being told what it is, but by actually doing it, by actually continually being empowered to and being and having people demand from you that you produce stuff that there's value in, that you keep building these things, that you keep thinking, how can I do something? How can I act? How can I build on what I've already been doing? And this is also how you learn to make games. Again, you can learn stuff from reading, you can learn stuff from listening to talks, maybe not this one, but you can learn stuff from listening to a lot of talks, but the way you actually learn how to make games is by making games. Again, that's the best advice I can give anyone who wants to go into the games business. That's learning how to make games. So, this is my contact info if you want to talk about this further. But I wanted to come back. This is the argument, right? If you're sitting out there and you're talking to a politician, why should we fund these games, game development courses? If you're talking to your parents, why would you want to make games? That's a frivolous, weird thing. Then you can say, well, if we do this, it's going to be fun. But we're also going to be able to do this. We're going to be able to see stuff that people enjoy and that brings value to them, and how you build that, basically. And there's the jazz again. That's because I'm at 7 minutes now. So I think we're going to go to questions, right? Thank you.
Right. Any questions for Mikkel? Anybody? There in the front. Where's our mic? Where's our mic? No mic, supposedly. Okie dokie. I'm on it.
I have a microphone up here, so.
You can keep it.
Yes, so my name is Walid, or Willy Wonka. I respond to both, or Mr. Shake. Entrepreneurship is something I really understand, and I would like to see your point of view on the relationship between delusional passion and proper entrepreneurship. Like, where is it in the games industry?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Usually we talk about passion in the games industry as being very dedicated to a product and being very dedicated to, I want to tell this story, I want to do this thing. This is something I see with a lot of my first-timer entrepreneurs, that they actually don't have an idea for a company, they have an idea for a game. And then the company is conceived of as, well, that's the way you do it. I think that's a very dangerous way of going about it. You have to want to actually make a company because if you don't think of the company as a product as well, then it's not going to get the attention that it deserves. If if you want to just make a game and not make a company, then you should be making that game. There's lots of ways you can do that by crowdfunding and Patreon and all sorts of ways. You can actually just focus on being a passionate artist if you want that. This is something that has opened up globally in a way that has never been before, basically. So I think that's one of them. When you get to a higher level and you have actually a large company, or you are working within a large company, then passion usually is used as an excuse to get you to work as hard as if you actually owned the company. So I think there's a flip side to it. I really don't like the word passion. I like the idea that you are excited about what you're doing, and I like that it's fun, that what you're doing, and I think that work should be fun. But if you sacrifice what's fun, what you want to do, to be able to do it, then you're not doing what you want to do. And I think this is what the idea is with this framework as well, that what we want to get to is not telling people what to do, but allowing them to do what they want to do and giving them those tools. That was rambling, but there was some sort of answer in there, I think. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you, Mikkel, first of all, for the very nice presentation. I want to ask from the field of education, do you think it's going to be a big threat for this industry because of the differences in generations? That you're talking about new ways and new methodologies of teaching. By the way, I really like the HAGI approach. And we all know that the biggest problem now in education is that majority of the teachers are from the baby boomers generation, while the majority of the students which are interested in game development are Generation Z. And the differences of generation, does it oppose different approaches to the education and entrepreneurship? Because the way how business and entrepreneurship was done in the past is completely different how it is done in today, especially in terms of games and games development.
Yeah, I don't think I'm comfortable talking about entrepreneurship before and now, but about education, I can answer that part of the question. This is something that I've seen because I've tried to get other people to use this HAGI model, and I've succeeded some places, but it's very difficult to do it in other departments in my own university, because the teachers are all of a different generation. And what I think you should do if you want to make this change as a manager in education, you should use the model, basically. You should realize that you can't just say, okay, now we do this and then we jump over here. You should actually have the teachers be involved in building this as an artifact and building this as a product, and using the principles of them acting and building and discussing and trusting each other to make this change. Change management is one of the most difficult things that there is at all in the modern world, right? But I think it can be done. You just need a lot of time. We could do it more quickly, because we basically had only one guy who was skeptical about it in our department, and he said, "Oh, okay, well, if we set up some sort of evaluation schemes," which worked out very well for me. If we set up some sort of evaluation schemes, then let's try it and see if it works. And then it worked. I think that's what you want to do. I also think that there's a challenge. I don't know if there's the same challenge here, but there's a challenge in Denmark with wanting to keep people on the labor market. And designing a lot of the way society is to incentivize, that's the word, incentivize people to stay beyond when they have energy for it, because otherwise, because birth rates are falling, right? So that's why they feel that way. And this is, especially in education, a problem, because that is a job that you can sort of carry on with. Your back is not broken. You're not actually physically destroyed. You're only mentally destroyed. And if you're like that, then you just go away, right? And then you can't incentivize that. But that's a societal problem as well, I think. So one more question.
I wanted to ask about what's your opinion about game engines, and should you create your own game engine?
Game engines and whether you should create your own. I think that it does, to a large degree, it doesn't matter. I work with games programmers mostly, and I educate games programmers, and they need to be able to make their own, I think, because that increases their understanding of other game engines both, and it also helps them do other programming stuff that's not game related. We usually, because we're actually a programming education that specializes in games, so they have to be able to go into and work at a bank, and very few bank systems are made in Unity, right? So you kind of have to know something other than just the game engines. I think if you're a designer or you are interested in general game development, I think that's not a stepping stone that you have to go beyond. Just go in and do something, because what you want is to build something quickly, and you want to have this quick feedback loop. That's why that's one of the reasons some of their games are crap, because we can't go directly to an engine, so they have to build everything themselves in a couple of weeks in the beginning. So it's very limited what they can do with some of that. But I had one student who in Twine, which is like an interactive storytelling thing where you make like one of those books where you turn to this page and that sort of thing, and he programmed so much JavaScript into it that it became a survival game where you crafted stuff, and he had an inventory and that sort of. So people can do all sorts of things with a lot of these tools, but I don't. Tools shouldn't limit you. Tools should help you, and you want to get to a place where you can get some quick feedback. Everyone who's tried programming knows this as well, because every programming course starts with "Hello World," and that's very uninteresting. But it's very interesting when you do it yourself, and that's the thing.
So hello. So next Friday, I'm starting to teach kids programming with Unintention. Can you give me any tips how to approach kids who, like, say it's not so hard to program like it used to be 10 years ago?
I don't know what you're using, if you're using Scratch, which people usually do.
I'm going to use Unintention, C# programming language.
Okay, directly to that. That's ambitious. I think you should design exercises where they do stuff very quickly. You shouldn't start introducing a lot of stuff at the beginning. I think you should say, okay, this is the basics of how it works in like 15 minutes or so, which obviously I can't, but I'm sure you can. Just limit yourself to 15 minutes, and then have them do something where they can see a result. It's also a good idea to build some stuff beforehand that they can then take and use and build upon. One of the exercises that I do sometimes, not with kids, because I have other colleagues who do the stuff with kids, is build a game and then have them describe how they want to modify it. And then you have to say, okay, that's a good design because you achieved this and that, and here is a way to do it, and then they do it, so that they get a sense of accomplishment. They get basically what this quick feedback loop is needed. So,
thank you. My idea was to for my lessons I have like much time. So my idea was to encourage people to use internet, to Google out some information, because I think the most thing that you're gonna use in programming is internet. Like to Google some code, everything else. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and you can also have them watch you do it, because then you break down the idea of authority. Programming is extremely hard if you think you have to know everything before you do anything. So having them see that even a teacher can do that would be a good idea. My clock up here, it's flashing red, so I'm thinking I'm done. But that's true, right? Yeah, I understood flashing red. That's the level of symbolism that I get. Thank you very much for coming. It was very nice talking to you about this. Please hit me up on Twitter or in person. I'll be here for the rest of the conference. Thank you.